Ever since the invention of gunpowder and explosives, military scientists have been in a race to design larger and more powerful weapons that are capable of causing devastating destruction to their target. Other than nuclear devices and bombs dropped from aircraft, artillery is the most destructive and effective device on a battlefield, and some that have been built are truly frightening. Let's take a look at the top 15 largest military artillery vehicles ever made. Number 15. 2S7 Mulka Artillery. The 2S7 Pion, which is also known as the Mulka, is a self-propelled heavy artillery that was revealed by the Soviet Army in 1975 and first used in the Soviet-Afghan War from 1979. Built by various different companies on the Army's behalf, it was believed that between 250 and 1,000 units were completed, and when the Soviet Union broke up, they were distributed among the former states. The vehicle itself measures about 34 feet long and requires a 14-person crew to operate. Mounted on it is a 40-foot or 12-meter-long 2A44 gun, which weighs 14 tons on its own and gives the 2S7 a total weight of 46.5 tons. 7 of the crew, along with 4 203mm projectiles, are carried by the vehicle, and a further 7 crew and 4 more shells are carried by its support vehicle. It takes all members around 6 minutes to set up or dismantle the weapon, and once it's ready to fire, it can launch its projectiles to a distance of 23 miles, or about 37 kilometers. This range can further be extended by an additional 11 miles, or 18 kilometers, with the use of a rocket-assisted projectile, and that means the crew are usually able to launch at least 2 rounds before being at any risk of countermeasures. The force required to fire this weapon is huge, though, and if a crew member isn't ready, they're at risk of being killed because of its concussive force. As a safety measure, an alarm sounds for 5 seconds before firing so everyone has time to prepare themselves. Number 14. 16-inch 50 caliber Mark 7 gun. The 16-inch 50 caliber Mark 7 United States naval gun is one of the most powerful guns ever built and served as the main weapon of the Iowa-class battleships used by the U.S. Navy from 1943 on. With a bore diameter of 16 inches or 40.6 centimeters, the fact that they were 50 caliber means that the gun was 50 times this figure in length, which is a massive 66 feet or 20 meters from chamber to the muzzle. Including the breech, the guns weighed around 134 tons, and 3 of them would be mounted to a specially designed turret. Each of these turrets needed 79 crew members to operate, and the guns were able to fire twice per minute. They were compatible with projectiles that weighed between 1,900 and 2,700 pounds, and could fire at a speed of 2,690 feet a second to a range of 24 miles, or about 39 kilometers. When firing at this distance, the shells would be in flight for around 1.5 minutes, and because of the ability to quickly rotate and change the elevation of the guns, they were remarkably accurate. Despite the huge amount of power involved in firing the weapon, stories of them being able to cause the ship to move sideways are false. The pressure wave they produced, though, had such an impact on the surface of the ocean that the images of them in operation can give the illusion that this is happening. Number 13. Thanjavur Cannon. The Thanjavur Cannon is a remarkable weapon that was produced in the early 17th century in Kolumedu, southern India, before being installed in the city of Thanjavur. Despite now being more than 400 years old and made mainly of iron, it hasn't rusted, which shows just how advanced the civilization's metallurgical skills were at that time. The purpose of the cannon was to protect the city from enemies who entered the eastern gate, and those that did were in for a nasty surprise. The cannon itself measures 26 feet or about 8 meters long and was forged welded instead of being cast. To give an idea of how thick it is, the outer circle has a diameter of just under 12 inches or 30 centimeters, and the diameter of the inner rim is just half of that. It weighs around 24 tons and required a large team to move it with the assistance of 8 iron rings, but this weight and size were necessary to handle the ammunition it used. Incredibly, the iron cannonballs weighed more than 1.1 tons each, and the sheer force of it became so legendary around the world at that time that the city was regarded as virtually unconquerable. Number 12. Little David. Little David was an affectionate name given to a mortar that was built by the American military for testing during the Second World War. It's one of the largest caliber guns to have ever been built, with a measurement of 36 inches or 91 centimeters. With a barrel length of 22 feet or 6.7 meters and an overall weight of 87 tons, the idea was that it would eventually be used to help breach the Siegfried Line, which was a defensive perimeter along the border between Nazi Germany and the Netherlands. It was able to be transported in 2 parts by M25 tractors and was cleverly designed so the base was a steel box placed beneath the ground so that the muzzle could be lowered horizontally and loaded from ground level. It took about 12 hours to set it up, and it was able to fire shells weighing 3,600 pounds or 1,600 kilos to a distance of 6 miles or 9.7 kilometers. When exiting the muzzle, this means the projectiles were traveling at speeds in excess of 1,250 feet or 381 meters per second, and the hopes was that this would allow the weapon to be set up and cause the damage before the enemy had a chance to respond. It means in the end the German defensive line was breached by a conventional means, and Little David was repurposed with a view to attacking the Japanese perimeter. This too became unnecessary after Japan's surrender, so Little David was never actually used in combat and was only ever fired at the Aberdeen Proving Ground. Number 11. 2B1 Oka. The 2B1 Oka was another huge Soviet self-propelled heavy artillery that was designed and built at the Kirov plant in St. Petersburg in the late 1950s. Only one experimental model was completed, and despite best efforts to improve on the design, it was found to simply be too powerful for its chassis and impractical in battlefield scenarios. The vehicle weighed 55 tons and was fitted with a 16.5-inch or 42-centimeter gun that was 66 feet or 20 meters long. This allowed it to fire rounds that weighed up to 1,600 pounds or 750 kilos and could reach targets 28 miles or 45 kilometers away. It was highly complex to load though, which meant it could only fire a round once every 5 minutes, and it was found that the recoil was so severe that components like the drive sprockets couldn't handle it, and even the gearbox would be ripped from its mountings. When these problems were added to the difficulty of actually transporting the Oka because of its size, the decision was made to end development in favor of ballistic missiles. Number 10. Big Bertha. Big Bertha was the nickname given to a German siege howitzer that was used by the Imperial German Army during the First World War between 1914 and 1918. It was a formidable weapon that remains one of the largest artillery pieces to ever be fielded in war, and batteries of these were able to tear through enemy fortifications. It was a heavy piece of equipment, weighing around 47 tons, so was normally transported by rail before being set up, a process that took 6 hours. Its 17-inch or 42-centimeter caliber barrel was 16 feet and 6 inches, or just over 5 meters long, and was able to fire shells that were themselves 4.9 feet or 1.5 meters long, and weighed more than a ton. These were launched at a velocity of 1,300 feet or 400 meters per second, and could reach a maximum distance of 5.8 miles or about 9.3 kilometers. With armor-piercing, high-explosive, or intermediate munitions available, each one could fire 8 rounds an hour. They were often used to lay siege to cities or enemy encampments. Ultimately, though, mainly because of their cost, only a handful of the original Big Berthas were completed, and they were used sparingly. They did, though, give the German war effort an effective design to work on, and led to the speedy development of a number of smaller and more manageable devices that would be used more commonly during the war. Number 9. Pumhardt von Steyr. Built at some point in the early 15th century, the Pumhardt von Steyr is a large-caliber cannon from Austria and is the biggest known wrought iron bombardment when measured by caliber to have ever been constructed. Weighing approximately 8 tons, its barrel is 4.7 feet or 1.4 meters long, and it has a 31-inch or 80-centimeter caliber, which means it was able to fire stone balls of that diameter that would have weighed 1,500 pounds or 690 kilos. Tests have shown that with 33 pounds or 15 kilos of gunpowder and with an elevation of 10 degrees, these projectiles would have traveled almost 2,000 feet or 600 meters, and a crew of 6 people could have fired a projectile every 2 or 3 minutes, something that would have been a game-changer at the time. Only one is believed to have been made, and it was used by the Holy Roman Empire to lay siege to enemy encampments in several wars, but it was stored away after a few years when smaller weapons were found to be more effective in the long run. It's again a testament to the construction techniques that the Pumhardt von Steyr still exists and could potentially even still be fired, and it currently can be seen on display at the Museum of Military History in Vienna. Number 8. The 100-ton gun. In the late 1800s, the largest guns being produced in England weighed around 38 tons and could fire projectiles weighing 818 pounds or 371 kilos. But companies were rushing to design something much larger, especially as the Royal Navy had requested an 81-ton gun. The main British artillery producer, Armstrong, had something even more powerful in mind, though, and was in the process of building the first one ever that was more than 100 tons. The Navy passed, though, thinking it was too heavy and expensive, but the company still built 15 of them and sold 8 of them to the Italian Navy. With a 17.7-inch or 45-centimeter caliber and a barrel length of 30 feet or 9.2 meters, these enormous weapons could fire a 1-ton shell at a speed of 1,500 feet or 472 meters per second to a distance of 3.7 miles or about 6 kilometers. The Italians soon began to install these guns on their new class of battleships, which were set to be the most powerful in the world. Quite how the management at Armstrong planned what would happen next as a business opportunity is not clear, but this sale frightened the commanders in the British Navy because when operational, there would be nothing that could defend against an onslaught by these battleships against bases in Malta and Gibraltar. As a result, they bought the remaining 100-ton guns to install at those bases with the belief that guns of a similar size that are based on land are more effective than those mounted to ships. In the end, the guns were never needed, probably because their existence prevented any attacks, and they were only ever fired for demonstrations. And because of their size, when it was time to eventually decommission them, it was deemed to be far too expensive to remove them. So 2 of the guns can still be seen in Gibraltar and Malta in the exact position they were installed more than 130 years ago. Number 6. 16-inch 50 caliber M1919 gun. Entering service in 1920 and finally decommissioned in 1946, the monstrous 16-inch 50 caliber M1919 gun was operated by the United States Army Coast Artillery Corps to fortify the country's seaports. Very few were actually built, and only 7 were installed, and were unusually designed with a wire-wound method, because the operators would be returning troops who had used European heavy weaponry during the First World War. With a 16-inch or 40.6 centimeter caliber and a barrel length of 66 feet or 20 meters, the gun fired shells weighing up to 2,100 pounds or 950 kilograms. They were launched at a velocity of 2,700 feet or 823 meters per second and could reach a maximum range of 27.9 miles or 44.9 kilometers. The guns themselves weighed 484 tons and could either rotate 360 degrees if open or 145 degrees when casemated to protect against an aerial attack. While further ones weren't built, other 16-inch weapons were designed for use by the Navy, and in the lead-up to the Second World War, when there was a fear of an attack, a number of these were modified onto M1919 carriages to increase the coastal defenses. As the war reached an end and this risk was reduced, the guns began to be scrapped, and the final ones were gone by 1948. Number 6. Mallet's Mortar. Mallet's mortar was a type of shell-firing mortar weapon that was designed by inventor Robert Mallet and produced by the Thames Iron Works and Shipbuilding Company, along with 3 other companies when they went bankrupt in the late 1850s. 2 were completed, with testing beginning in October of 1957, but this was much later than the British Army had hoped, because the plan was originally for them to be used in the Crimean War that ended several years earlier. Featuring a 36-inch or 91-centimeter caliber, but a relatively short barrel length of 11 feet or 3.4 meters, the weapon weighed 43 tons in total. It was designed to fire 1.3-ton cartridges that, with an 80-pound or 36-kilogram charge, could reach a range of 1.5 miles or 2.4 kilometers. This is one of the largest caliber weapons to ever be produced and fired, but it soon proved to be completely impractical. Only 4 days of testing were carried out, which saw 19 rounds being fired, and they proved that a rate of 4 per hour was possible. The problem, though, was that each of the 4 tests had to end early because of significant damage that had been caused to the mortar by the forces being channeled through it. Without stronger materials, there was no way to overcome this, so since then the 2 guns have been in the collection of the Royal Armouries, which is the British National Museum of Arms and Armour. Number 5. Karl Gerät. The Karl Gerät was a devastating weapon that was designed and built by the automotive company Rheinmetall for use by the Nazis during the Second World War. Classified as a self-propelled siege mortar, it weighed 137 tons, had a 23-inch or 60-centimeter caliber, and a barrel length that measured 13 feet 9 inches or 4.2 meters. It was able to fire shells that varied in weight between 2,700 and 4,700 pounds, or 1,250 and 2,100 kilograms, and could launch these to a maximum distance of 6.2 miles, or about 10 kilometers. The intent was to use these to relentlessly pound the Allied defense lines, and 7 were built, of which 6 saw combat. They were used, for example, to bombard Polish resistance fighters in Warsaw and to destroy vital bridges to slow down Allied troop progressions. But despite their huge power, the Karlgarat did come with some limitations. They were so large and heavy that they needed a huge amount of support. Not only did they require a 21-person crew to operate, but also a crane and a 2-piece set of heavy transport rail cars, and even then, a number of dedicated tanks that could carry the shells. They could only move at a maximum speed of 6.2 miles or about 10 kilometers an hour, which meant their use had to be carefully pre-planned, and they couldn't be quickly deployed if battle conditions changed. During the fall of the Third Reich, all of the Karlgarats were either destroyed or captured, and only one now remains that's on display at a museum in Russia. Number 4. Type 94 Naval Gun. The Japanese battleship Yamato was one of 2 in her class, and both hold the record for being the largest and most powerfully armed battleships of all time. Crucial to this was their main weapon, the Type 94 Naval Gun, which is the largest to ever be mounted to a warship. The gun itself weighed more than 150 tons, had a barrel length of 69 feet 4 inches or 21.1 meters, and a caliber of 18.1 inches or 46 centimeters. Able to fire shells that weighed more than 1.5 tons, it had a rated muzzle velocity of 2,600 feet or 780 meters per second and a range of up to 26 miles or 42 kilometers. 27 of these guns were built, although only 18 were ever installed, with 9 on the Yamato and 9 on her sister ship. The reason the Japanese decided to build these was their strategists believed the outcome of the war would come down to one decisive naval battle, and that having the most powerful ships would almost guarantee victory. In the end, though, the Yamato only fired at enemy surface targets once, and in desperation at the Allied advance in 1945, was ordered to beach herself in Okinawa to try to slow the enemy down, and was easily sunk by American bombers. Number 3. Model 520 Howitzer, 1916. Built by the French Army during the First World War, the Model 520 Howitzer was a railway howitzer that they hoped would help repel German forces. Ultimately, though, of the 2 that were completed, one was destroyed in testing, and the other was only used in warfare once it had been captured by Nazi troops in 1940 and used during the siege of Leningrad. They had a 20-inch or 52-centimeter caliber and a barrel length of 39 feet, or about 11.9 meters. Weighing 290 tons, they were able to fire shells that weighed up to 3,600 pounds, or 1,600 kilograms, and could achieve a muzzle velocity of 1,600 feet, or 500 meters per second. This meant that the projectiles could travel to targets up to 10.5 miles, or 17 kilometers away, and would have been able to fire once every 6 minutes. There were, though, serious flaws in the design, and after the developers realized it would take too long and be too costly to overcome, the plans for further guns like these were canceled. Number 2. BL 18-inch Mark I Naval Gun. The BL 18-inch Mark I naval gun was the second largest naval gun ever developed, but it holds the record for firing the heaviest shells from a vessel at sea. It was designed for the British Navy during the First World War, and the 3 that were built were installed on the HMS Furious. This ship never used them in battle, though, and they were transferred to 2 other ships for coastal bombardment duties. Even then, only 85 rounds were fired before the end of the war, and the guns were scrapped after that. Each one weighed 151 tons, had an 18-inch or 45.7 centimeter caliber, and a 60-foot or 18.3 meter long barrel. They could fire shells that weighed 3,300 pounds, or about 1,500 kilograms, with a muzzle velocity of 2,400 feet, and with a maximum range of 23 miles or 37 kilometers. While they were certainly effective and could fire once a minute, their cost in both monetary terms and the quantity of materials meant that alternative weapons were prioritized instead. Number 1. Schwere Gustav. Of all the heavy artillery developed by the Nazis during the Second World War, the Schwere Gustav was the most destructive. It was a railway gun that was developed in the late 1930s with the explicit purpose of being used as siege artillery to break through defensive lines, some of which had the strongest fortifications that had ever been built. Weighing just under 1,500 tons, 2 of these monstrous weapons were constructed, and they hold the record for being the largest caliber rifled weapon ever used in combat, the heaviest mobile artillery piece that's ever been built, and for using the heaviest shells of any artillery piece in history. The barrel of the Schwerer Gustav was 106 feet or 32 meters long, and it had a 31-inch or 80-centimeter caliber. It required a 250-person crew to prepare it for use, which took 3 days, a further 2,500 to lay the track ahead of it, and 2 flak battalions to protect it from being attacked from above. It could fire 14 rounds per day at a distance of up to 30 miles or 47 kilometers, and each one that landed was truly devastating. There was a choice of using either high explosive or armor-piercing rounds. Both were just under 12 feet or 3.6 meters long and weighed up to 8 tons each. The high explosive variant was able to produce a crater 30 feet or 9 meters wide and deep, and the armor-piercing one could blast through 23 feet or 7 meters of reinforced concrete. Watch our Machines playlist for more top 15 videos about awesome machines. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best machine videos.